Yo, what up, though? I have a legend in the building, probably the most sought-after person in the city, especially if you're getting in a little bit of trouble. Hi, attorney Steve FISHMAN. How you doing?
Good. Everything's good.
Hey, just want to take the time. Thank you for sitting down with me and welcome to Mogul State of Mind, man. How everything been going with you?
Everything's all right for a man of my vintage, you know. I'm not so young anymore, but things are still okay. I get to the gym every morning still, so that's good.
There you go. Now you 70, 75?
74. I'll be 75 in March.
And you're still practicing?
Still practicing. I don't go to state court anymore because state court is so slow and it's kind of a pain. So I have only federal stuff, and it works out pretty well for me.
Okay. Well, why not the state?
State court, the whole system is a lot slower. They have way too many cases. They'll have, 7 lawyers, 8 lawyers, 10 lawyers up the same day. I don't really feel like getting somewhere at 8:30, and my case doesn't get called till 11:30.
Yeah. And
quite frankly, the kind of guys that I represented all those years, they don't really exist anymore. A lot of these guys in the streets are different. They want to do all the stuff they want to do, but a lot of them don't want to take the consequences. They think they're entitled to go home all the time, even though they're doing a lot of things that keep you from going home all the time. The guys in the older days, the guys who were involved, they knew there were things that happen when you're involved. You pay lawyers. Sometimes you take a plea or you get convicted and then you go to jail. They could take it.
Gotcha.
These young guys can't.
Can't take it. Before we get into your story, when dealing with a client, had you ever told them to cooperate?
You're required, just so everybody knows that, because that's a question that people ask all the time. There's no lawyer that deals with criminal defendants. If the government, now keep in mind this happens way more in federal court than it does in state court, because state court generally, you sold a dope or you didn't. You stuck up the gas station or you didn't. It's not like there's a big conspiracy and a lot of people to, quote, cooperate against. In federal court, the charges oftentimes are conspiracy charges, particularly with respect to drugs. And a lot of guys who are at the federal level of drugs, they know a lot. I say all that to say that any lawyer that says they don't inform their client about the opportunity to cooperate is either lying or he or she's not doing what you're supposed to do. We are required to tell every client what it is that the government is offering or what the government is threatening them with. I mean, we're required. So do I ever tell anybody this is what you should do? No. But I'm required to tell them that this is what the government wants and this is what they're offering you if you decide you want to do that. And then it's up to the client, up to the defendant as to what he wants to do.
As an attorney, if you see a defendant who's supposed to be a quote-unquote street person and they end up cooperating, they end up, as the streets say, snitching, how do you feel about it? What is your perspective on quote-unquote snitches?
I would say it this way. There's a number of different reasons why people snitch. The first, most obvious one is they're trying to not go to jail themselves or they're trying to reduce their sentence, okay? It's pretty tough for anybody. I mean, I know everybody talks about it in the streets. Yeah, I'll never snitch, I'll never snitch. Same thing when in the penitentiary. They go to the feds and everybody said, did you snitch, did you snitch? 80% of the people in there, well, maybe that's too high. More than 50 cooperated in some way. And there's all different ways to cooperate, too. You got to remember, the higher up somebody is out in the street world and in the drug world, the more things they know that they can just direct. It might be a guy they hate. It might be one of their competitors out on 7 Mile, let's say. And they want them to, quote, cooperate. They tell them, hey, go over there, 18679 Rose Lawn, you'll find some shit over there. Go over here. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. At the end of the day, because such a high percentage of people cooperate nowadays, that the word snitch, back when I started 50 years ago and then up through maybe the mid-90s, or was it the 80s, whenever it was when the Pony Boys went to, nobody, quote, snitched. They just took their time. There was a lot less time that was being handed out in those days. So if a guy got 12, he'd come home in 7, and what the hell, 7 years after how much dough he made out in the world. Now the sentences are a lot harder, and a lot of the people, they look and they say, and they come up with reasons too.
Yeah.
I'll tell on that motherfucker because he did something to me back when we were in high school or something like that. They justify what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's the way the federal system works. They offer everybody that's in a conspiracy type case, everybody gets the chance to cooperate. And you'd be surprised, and your listeners would be surprised as to some of the level of people who have cooperated and nobody knows about it.
Wow. Now, a lot of people talk about President Biden being in office, and they talk about the Clinton crime bill that was passed back in the 90s where it incarcerated a lot more people. Do you feel like those laws was really that hindrance to like minorities?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. When they passed that crime bill, and Biden was a senator, and he was a big pusher of that, by the way, which I think is why now he talks more about let's give some people a break and this and that and the other. I absolutely think it was. Look, just the fact that they treated crack the way they treated it, who were they kidding? Everybody knew where was the crack. The crack's in the city. Who lives in the city? Black people.
Yeah.
Who comes to the city to buy a lot of the crack? White people. But they don't get charged with it because they just got little small amounts. They get picked up and they plead the possession of the drugs and they give 2 years probation. But there wasn't any doubt. And I don't know, and I'm not saying that a bunch of white senators sat down and said, look, we'll just screw over the brothers and the sisters.
Yeah.
I just think that they were getting pushed about drugs, crime. And this was their response. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, most white people don't know a whole hell of a lot about black people to begin with. And they don't think a whole hell of a lot about black people. I'm not saying that they're necessarily negative. They just don't really have any knowledge of it. They don't come in. The people who passed that bill, none of them lived in Detroit or Chicago. They live in the suburbs or up north or something like that. And a lot of that matters too. And it matters, if we were to get into it, it matters in everyday life. I mean, you know, as a black man, I know as a white guy being around black people all my whole life, there's very few people that are like me, very few people with a white face that know black people, understand what black people are up against all the time, just by nature of the color of their skin.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'll give you a quick example. My wife is very light. She's black, but she's very light. And my kids, my son, you'd know for sure he was black. Anybody black knows.
Yeah.
My daughter, even black people sometimes don't look. They have a different outlook, although both of them know they're black, and they certainly know that the world is white, and they know that there's stuff waiting for them if they get off the path. But the fact that they're light, it just makes a difference.
Yeah.
We'll go places, and if people might think that they're Mexican or something like that. My wife, I can't tell you. We've been out of the country. My Spanish is very good. She can't speak Spanish. They come up, the Mexicans will come and start speaking to her because she's light, she's got a little color, maybe she's a Mexican. Then I have to go over and say, hey, excuse me, and I tell them in Spanish, you're talking to the wrong person. But, I mean, it's something that this society, this was a country founded on slavery. Who are we kidding? I mean, that's why down south they don't want you to study that kind of history because that's the truth. That's the truth. And when everybody migrated up here, they were migrating for work. The black people and the white people, they were coming up here to work in the plants and that kind of stuff. And a lot of the mentality came along with it. And it's to pretend that didn't exist or it doesn't still exist today, that's you're just ignoring history.
Now, I know Donald Trump made a statement that if he got in office, he would push to have all drug dealers face the death penalty. I don't know if you saw that clip.
Oh, I've seen it, absolutely. More than once he said it.
How do you feel about that push for...
What it shows is, well, first thing, when you're talking about someone like Trump, this is not a regular person. This is a career criminal, the son of a career criminal. He has a criminal mind. And so few people understand it. People are shocked when he says stuff. I've spent my entire life basically around crooks. And I know how crooks think. There are some accidental crooks. There are some people that just do it once or twice, but there are some people who have criminal minds, and he has a criminal mind. For him to say something like that, he's playing to whatever base it is that he thinks he's appealing to. Yeah. And I can tell you this, Derek, I can tell you this for sure, because I've seen it 1,000 times in my life, and I guarantee you regular non-lawyers have seen it as well. People hate drug dealers. They all should be put to death. They all should get life, whatever it is, until it's their cousin or their son or their friend who gets charged with selling cocaine. Then you say, well, no, we're not going to put him to death. That's my buddy. I grew up with him. That's my son. That's my cousin. It's easy to talk like that when the only criminality, Trump's been a criminal all his life, but it's all white-collar crime.
Yeah.
Robbing from this person, Trump University, not paying his taxes. It's all white-collar stuff. So it's easy for him to say, oh, yeah, all dope dealers should get life. Wait till if one of his nephews or his son got picked up selling weed, that's a dope dealer in the old days. The death penalty for selling weed or even for selling cocaine. I mean, come on. So you got to consider the source. When somebody says something like that, in addition to the fact that he's just a towering asshole, when someone says something like that, it shows their ignorance of what really the world is all about. You cannot be that isolated. All of us, I don't care where you come from, especially from an urban area. I have friends that did lots of time. Guys I knew in high school, right, that did time in prison because they were mostly drugs, although I had, different things, homicides every now and then. But if you know somebody or you know people that are involved in that, it makes it a lot tougher to start saying, let's use the death penalty or let's give everybody mandatory life. And so I can seg back to when Blanchard was governor and they decided it'd be a great idea to make over 650 grams mandatory life. Remember back in the 80s?
Yeah, I remember that. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, that was a great idea. The purpose supposedly was they would get people to quit selling drugs. Unfortunately, the price of cocaine went down. That statute was passed, and everybody's supposed to be getting life, and oh my God, nobody will sell drugs now. The price went down, and your listeners, I'm sure, know if the price goes down, it probably means there's more available to buy than there was before.
Yep.
So that's how much that worked. At the end of the day, it's a response to the public in general, but not to specific people who know people who have been in the criminal justice system or involved in the drug trade. That's what it all is. It's all blowhardism. When Trump talks, it's just blowhardism. Luckily, he's not in a position to make the law.
Yeah.
But people who talk like that, if I sat with them, not him, because he's got such a criminal mind. The normal person, I would be able to tell him, well, wait a minute, I heard what you just said. You have any kids or nephews or friends on your block that get in trouble? Oh, yeah. You want them to get the death penalty? No, hell no, I don't want them to.
Exactly. I want to capture your journey because you have a unique perspective on Detroit. You're a Detroit native, born and raised here, right?
That's right.
So
I got a T-shirt that says "Bred, born, raised, and educated in Detroit."
Got you. Now you're one of the ones that got to see Detroit prior to the riots, after the riots. You've been here all the way to where it is now. So take me to that journey of young Steve Fishman growing up. What, you on the west side of Detroit?
Northwest Detroit.
Northwest Detroit.
Roselawn 7 Mile, right down from UD High.
There you go. Tell me your upbringing, man. What was it like for you in Detroit back in those days?
Well, there's a couple things that need to be said, and this applied to pretty much everybody of my generation. The parents, first thing, almost everybody had two parents in the house. Almost everybody. Didn't matter if you were black or white or Jewish or whatever it was. Almost everybody did. Divorce was far less common than it is now, and people having kids out of wedlock was almost never happened, okay?
Yeah.
Back in those days. But the thing was the parents, and again, it didn't matter if it were black parents, white parents, Jewish parents, it didn't matter. The parents had done two things that nobody nowadays has done. Number one, they lived through the Depression. And the Depression, if anybody bothers to read history, that's when you start talking about poverty on top of poverty for everybody.
Yeah.
The second thing was they lived through the war, through World War II. And many of the dads, my dad, my high school center dad, they served in the Army. My father was in the Navy. So they had served in a war, which meant a couple of things. Number one, they'd seen a depression, which meant they weren't blowing money on nothing because they had lived where nobody had anything. My grandfather, my father's father, had been very successful. And my father was off playing baseball and basketball at the University of Michigan, and the Depression hit, and they went from literally living pretty good to my father, when he went to the minor leagues, he was making $500 a month pitching at AAA level. He was sending half of it home, literally. So they were careful about their money. They didn't blow it on stuff. And the second thing was, that because they had been raised tough, let's put it that way, and because they'd been in the military, they didn't brook any nonsense from their children, particularly from their sons.
Right.
There was none of this, huh? I mean, if my father called me and I said, huh? I don't care if I was 8. Nothing good is going to happen about that. And nowadays, when I see how kids talk to their parents, I wish my father could come back. He's been gone almost 60 years. I wish he could see this because he would be, You let them talk to you like that? So that's the second thing that was different. So when we came up, when we went to Mumford, the school was changing. Mumford was originally built in the early 50s. I was a little boy.
Okay.
I was still living in an apartment on Lawton in Cortland at the time. And it was mostly a Jewish school. The neighborhood was pretty much Jewish. And another thing is everybody went to school in their own neighborhood, except for Cass. The real brilliant kids could go to Cass from anywhere in the city. But we all went to our neighborhood school, not like now where everybody's the east side going to school on the west side and everything's all screwed up. So Mumford was built. It was a very good school. A lot of people went to college, very good curriculum. And then the neighborhood started to change. So when we got there in the fall of 63, it was probably, my guess, 75% Jews.
Okay.
Our class, we always joke about, our class was 50% Jewish, 49% blacks, and 3 Catholic kids who got kicked out of UAD High. We always made that joke. We were all mixed. Of the 4, the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer was 2 Jews and 2 blacks. I mean, that's just the way it was. The basketball team, as you can see from these pictures, was a little different. It was just me and the fellas. But that had more to do with basketball ability than it did somebody saying, oh, no, we don't want any Jews on the team. If you can't play, you ain't playing. That's all. You're not going to be on the squad. So that was 1966. That was the complexion of our class. The riots came in 1967, July. My sister, my next youngest sibling, she graduated Mumford in 1969, 2 years after the riot. The school was probably 85 to 90% black and 10 to 15% Jewish. Same thing happened on the east side. Denby, Osborne, Finney, they all fled to Warren. The Jews in Northwest Detroit went to Southfield. And a lot of these kids graduated from Southfield High. That's where they wound up doing. So the city changed as people were moving anyway. The riots weren't the only thing that caused it to happen, but it accelerated the thing. Even though, well, we did have a little stuff in our neighborhood. They did set the Merchandise Mart on fire. I remember the paint cans popping. I thought I was driving home. I thought someone was shooting at me. But that was really what changed everything. And then you had, until Coleman came in 1973, you had 95% white police department.
Wow.
And they were, that's not an exaggeration. There were very few black officers. And the police commissioner, the commander rather, or whatever they called him, it was bad. It was bad out there. You had stress, which you probably have heard about, where they would go out and dress like me and you are dressed today and pretend like they were targets, and then they'd hope somebody tried to stick them up, and they killed a lot of people.
Wow.
It was bad. And Coleman Young's election really was the thing that started to give black folk a chance to be part of the administration. He changed everything.
Now, because I know I hear a lot of people talk about like Paradise Valley and things of that nature. And I was told like at one point in time, majority of black people were on the east side versus in like west side. Like I say, I went to Cody, and you advised me that Cody at one point was just all white.
When I was in high school, there wasn't a black kid there.
So Joy Road, that was
all white. Everybody started at. I mean, the east side is where the city of Detroit started. If you go to the buildings, go to look at the houses there and look at the houses we grew up in, you can tell it's a lot different, okay? In Paradise Valley, the tragedy of that was when they built the expressway, and now it's coming up again, as you've noticed. Yeah. But what they did was, that was a black area of town where lawyers and doctors and dentists and everybody, and it was just a great place to live. And when they built the expressway and knocked all that out of the way, they claimed they needed to do it so you could get downtown quicker. Some people would say it was so the white people that lived in the suburbs didn't have to come up above the ground and see, go on Woodward or John R. or something like that. But, I don't know that. I was a little kid, at the time. So the city changed, and we got to the point, it's only recently, really in the last, 10 years?
Yeah.
That white people are moving back in. And now, I have to tell you, my wife and I, when that first started, we went to dinner at the downtown restaurant. We walked in, had to be 50, 60 people, We're looking, I said, Jerry, you're the only black person in here. We couldn't believe it. It was like right down by Hudson's, by Old Hudson.
Yeah.
We looked at all white people and young white people.
It was different for me, I think, coming back. My first time coming back to Detroit after I left was 2013. And I decided, I said, you know what, usually I come, my sister still stay over on Joy Road area. I was like, I'm gonna give me a spot downtown, and I'm gonna get the tourist feel. And at nighttime, I was seeing white women jog, and I was like, wait,
walking their dogs.
Yeah, walking their dogs.
I'm telling
Like, it's crazy. And so here it is. You growing up, you end up going to University of Michigan scholarship for basketball.
I played basketball.
Played basketball. Okay, so you walked on.
Well, we didn't call it that in those days, but
okay. It was your ambition also always to be an attorney? Was that something that was on your mind?
That's a great question, and I've been asked it any number of times in interviews just like this. You got to remember, I went to the University of Michigan in the fall of 1966. I was a good student, and I had no thought of being a lawyer. My father and my mother both were school teachers, and then my father went in an insurance business because he was very well known because he was a great athlete. And then in December of 1967, when I was at basketball practice, my father dropped dead in the gym.
Wow.
So and I had two younger sisters and my ma still living in the city, right? The other thing that was going on then when people asked me, did I have a plan? The Vietnam War was going on then. And until you found out whether you were going to get drafted or not, there was no sense making any plan. The guy who played the other guard with me at Mumford, we graduated in 66. I went up to U of M. We played our freshman year. When I came home, I called my high school center. He was best friends with Dennis. I said, well, let's go play. He lived on Normandy and Puritan.
Okay.
So let's go up to Post or go somewhere and play. He said, all right. I said, well, call Dennis. He said, Dennis is dead. I said, Dennis is dead? What are you talking about? He had gone down to Philander Smith to college, black school down south. Somehow, they drafted him, got him in the Army, sent him to Vietnam, and he'd already been killed.
Wow.
I say that story to say that there was no sense, unless you were somebody like Trump, you're going to bring him up again. You're going to buy your way out and put some bullshit about his bone spurs or whatever it was. I knew plenty of people like that. They got doctors to write stuff. Number one, I'd have never done it. My father was a naval officer in the war, for God's sake. My uncle was a naval officer in the war. But who am I going to pay? I didn't have any money to pay anybody. But I wouldn't have done it anyway. So I didn't do anything until December the 1st of 1969. And everybody my age, other than the ones who had money to buy their way out, everyone remembers that day because that was the day of the first draft lottery. They got sick of giving different deferments, student deferments, if you had kids, deferments, all that kind of crap. They had a lottery. Everybody was in the lottery and it went by your birthday. Just like we have a lottery now, but the difference was now you win money or you win nothing. In those days, you'd live or die, depending on
That's crazy.
We opened up, we played UAD at Chrysler. And of course, only in Ann Arbor, people had lottery parties. They'd sit around, drink beer, smoke weed, whatever they were doing, because they're watching their future. And I got to my buddy's house. We played, I think we got done at 7:30 to 9. And by then they'd already gone. He knew my birthday because I grew up with him. And he had a beer. He says, have a beer, man. He says, they're up to 210 or something, and they haven't got to you yet. Then, and only then, could I think about what am I going to do with the rest of my life.
Wow.
Only then. There was no sense planning, at least as far as I was concerned, when you didn't know if you're going off to war.
So at one point in time, going to college did exonerate you from being drafted.
But what they did was, and they were right to do it by a lottery. They really were, because it changed every year. If you got a 2S, it was called. That was if you were a student. Then the next year they said, no, you got to be in the top 50%. I mean, they had different rules, and people were cheating like crazy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then they had something about if you married. In fact, one of the great warmongers, Dick Cheney, who became vice president, he dodged the draft 5 different ways. He didn't buy his way out like Trump, but if you're married, okay, so he got married. And then, if you're have kids, they had kids. That was his way of avoiding. And then, of course, he becomes a warmonger when he becomes vice president. He doesn't have to go.
That is crazy.
So anyway, I didn't know what I was going to do. My mom and I talked about it. My mom was an educator. And nobody believes this when I go and speak at the law schools. We said, yeah, maybe we'll go to law school. So I applied to Wayne, and I borrowed $3,000 from my mother. And that paid for 3 years of law school at Wayne State, $900 a year. Now, $35,000 a year. Some of these other schools, Michigan, $65,000. That's what allowed me to go to law school. If it would have been like it is now, I'd have been coaching basketball or teaching piano or something like that.
Now, take me into the type of law. What attracted you to criminal law, being a defense attorney?
That was pretty easy. When I first went to law school, the first year you have all these boring things, property, contracts, and I'm like, I really didn't like it. Second year, I had criminal procedure with a great teacher who's now still a federal judge, Judge Paul Borman.
Mm-hmm.
And I had evidence with a guy named Michael Josephson, who was a brilliant, brilliant guy. And I loved those two classes. The rest of it was still a bunch of crap. And once I saw, oh, yeah, you can get into, and, I had a lot of street knowledge, obviously, and I knew people who had been in trouble. And they had a little program there our second year that allowed us to go to court, traffic court it was called in those days, and there'd be a lawyer with you, a guy who was a professor, but you could stand up in front of the judge and blah, blah, blah. I like that. I've always been comfortable on my feet. I've never been scared of nothing, really, and I could see that's what I was going to do. So I got a job at the defender's office as a researcher, they called it, for the summer between my second year and third year. And that was it. Then I knew I was going to do that. I didn't really have any interest at all in any other types of law. I mean, writing wills or looking at contracts, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
I like standing up in front of people. And, I've said before on these types of interviews, I think trial lawyers are born more than they are made. You have to have a certain personality for it. You got to not be afraid. Strangers can't bother you because there's always 12 strangers
Right.
in the jury box. They ain't your friends. If they lived on Roselawn, they're not going to be able to sit there because they know you.
Gotcha.
So that's how it happened, and it was kind of a natural seg. And I only stayed at Defenders 2.5 years.
Okay.
And the reason was I didn't want to. I'd gotten to the top of, they didn't pay you very much, and I'd gotten to the top of the pay scale. I wanted to see if I could make a living at it. And I didn't want to do it by taking assignments from the judges. I only took assignments for maybe a year and a half. I wanted to see if I could make a living where people would come in and hire me, because they wanted me as their lawyer. I didn't want to be beholden to judges for assignments. They wanted you to buy tickets to their, all that kind of stuff. I buy tickets to judges, not anymore. When I was in state court, judges who I think are really good judges, that's who I buy tickets to.
Okay.
Because I think they're good. I don't expect them to do shit for me. I just like to have them there because I know what they're doing, And it worked. I started on my own May of 76.
Okay.
47 years ago.
Wow.
It's a long time.
Do you still have the same passion for it as you when you first started? Other than I know you say you don't like to do the state court.
I do. I'm going to try a case, another guy and I, we're going to try a case in federal court in about a month.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to it. It's the one thing that's interesting, and this applies, I think, to all walks of life. We were kind of talking about it before we started doing this. You got to really be careful when you're my age and you have my experiences and you have just the things I would talk about normally when you have a lot of younger people that are being on the jury. I mean, you can be on a jury at 21. I don't keep that young people, but you could have people in their 30s and 40s. And quite frankly, if you ask all of them, you told me, I'll give you $1,000 if you can tell me who David Ruffin was.
Right.
They're going to go, David Ruffin, who the hell? And then black people or white people, it doesn't matter.
We can go ahead. Sorry about that.
That's all right. So that's a little bit different. They do. They used to say you shouldn't even be trying cases in your 60s, but of course people were not as healthy. People weren't going to the gym and eating better and drinking better wine. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the one thing you have to be careful of. I used to use these analogies, particularly when I was in state court, because when the city, when we just had recorder's court, which was only city crimes and only city jurors. And for a while, you'd have 12 jurors, 11, sometimes 12 black people, 11 black people. So I could talk about my background. I could tell stories. Everybody knew who David Ruffin was. Let's put it that way. If I wanted to use some kind of an analogy to a song, I could use it. Everybody, they know that. So now, the youth, they don't know who the hell the Temptations were. They certainly don't know who David Ruffin was.
Absolutely.
So that's a little bit different.
Now, when it come to like doing trials and things of that nature, which do you like better? Like murder trials, drug cases? Like what's the one that you like kind of rub your hands like, yeah?
Well, because I don't go to state court anymore, I've probably tried 50, 60, 70 murder cases in my life, at least, I'm sure. I tried 8 in 1 year once. I remember that.
Wow.
In 1 year. The easiest way to answer that is to say what kind of cases I don't like, which means I don't take them. I never took child abuse cases, ever, never will. Never took rape cases 99% of the time, unless I knew for sure the guy didn't do it, because I just didn't want to be sitting there cross-examining women about whether or not, So I kind of restricted myself by the way in which I chose to do it, to murder and drugs. That's, and pistols. And of course, because everybody's got to have a pistol back in the murder trials, I liked them. And the best thing about cases in those days, and this is a big distinction from now, there's no social media in those days. There's no cameras all over the place in those days. There's no idiot people talking and texting. So when the cops grab their phones, it says what you did, that kind of stuff. In those days, everything really boiled down to witnesses. And witnesses said things, and I cross-examined them. And for me, that was the most fun, and that was something I think I was pretty good at. So the cases all boiled down to whether the witnesses could convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that your guy did it. And you got to keep in mind, it doesn't mean that the jury thought he didn't do it, because I would make sure they understood that. You don't have to say he didn't do it. You just have to say you're not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he did. So even if you think that he did, or you suspect that he did, and if you can get jurors to understand that, you have a good chance of winning. Nowadays, because of the social media and just all the stuff that's out there, it's a lot harder to have a trial because the government has all that stuff. Yeah. You cannot believe, and maybe you do it yourself because you're young. I cannot believe people. I have a flip phone, as I told you, so I can't get in that position anyway. How can people be so stupid as to keep all of these things on their fucking phone? I know guys and women who've gotten divorced because they leave something on their phone, their spouse, what the hell? And these guys have pictures of them carrying AK-47s, pictures of them with piles of dope, $100,000. How are you going to try the case when they accuse you of being a dope dealer and there's a picture of you smiling with $100,000 sitting in front that comes out of your phone, for God's sake,
Oh, yeah, that's tough.
And it's just beyond my comprehension that people save all this crap. I mean, for what? I just don't understand it,
What about when they're trying to try people by their rap lyrics, like the things that they're saying in songs?
See, at the end of the day, the original guy for that was, I'm forgetting his name. He was in front of Judge Rosen, federal court. He's doing life. Mm. People would know who I'm talking. As I get older, I forget names sometimes. You can't try somebody unless it's a really, really, I can't think of a case. It's not going to be the rap lyrics themselves. You're not on trial for writing shit in your lyrics, but you're on trial for murder, let's say, and you've had 4 songs where you've described murdering, and one of them actually describes it almost to a T. And I went on Roselawn, down between Clarita and Margarita, and I shot some guy. And it just turns out, lo and behold, the guy got shot on Roselawn between Clarita and Margarita. The government has every right to use that. That in and of itself doesn't prove anything. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they'll say, isn't it interesting that the defendant here happened to pick that particular area of town, that street, and those 2 cross streets. And isn't that something? And here we have a witness that says he's the one who killed the guy on Roselawn between Clarita and Margarita. So it's not a crime to do it, but they can use it against you, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Detroit is known as a city of hustlers. People call it a city of bosses. A lot of drug kingpins here. People know a lot of murders happen here. In your expertise and from what you experienced during your trials, majority of the murders that you have to represent, was it caused from being in a dope game? What is usually the cause of most murders that you have to represent?
I would say a few things. The first thing is you got to remember a lot of killings still, even today, are family related. Mm-hmm. The boyfriend kills the girlfriend, the boyfriend kills the other one, the second boyfriend, or what? That's a separate set of homicides. And I might have had 1 or 2 like that, but generally that's not what I had. What you had in those days, they were related to drugs almost all the time, and people who got killed a lot of times were not exactly a guy you were going to give an award to at the Kiwanis Club. Mm. And that makes a big difference when you're trying a jury case, because the thing that makes it difficult, for instance, where those kids are killed in Oxford, if you were to go to trial, if the parents go to trial, for instance, the jurors know that their son murdered and these are teenagers that are high school students. So then jurors tend to sympathize a lot more with the prosecution. When you had the kind of homicides that I had, I wouldn't say it to the jury, but you'd say where it's a street guy being accused of killing another street guy. There's nothing about the deceased guy that would cause the jury to say, oh, God, that's awful. In fact, sometimes I've had jurors tell me after, that guy wasn't worth, they don't say it like that, but the dead guy, he was no good. And said, you're right, you heard the testimony, he's no good. He's a dope dealer, or he was a killer, or whatever. So the cases in those days were almost all related to what I would say the business of drugs, the ones that I tried, a lot of it, one way or the other. Now, which is another reason I don't go to state court, these kids shoot each other over absolutely nothing. What you doing on my side of the street? Why are you wearing a purple shirt? I mean, are you kidding me? They shoot little kid, an 8-year-old, to make a point to somebody who dissed them on social media. I mean, come on.
That's crazy.
And that's the second reason why I don't get involved in the state court stuff. I can't even listen to that. I could see it in the dope game. Okay, you're quarreling over who knows what. You gave him some bad dope, or you're trying to infringe on my territory, whatever it is. Okay, fine. There's 2 crooks, or 4 crooks, or however many there are, and they're beefing, and one of them kills the other guy. Okay, it doesn't make it right, although it can make you not guilty a lot because of who it was that died.
Now, recently I interviewed Nate Boone Craft. Hell of a storyteller. And of course, Boone is, some people revere him as one of the most notorious hitmen in Detroit. He told a lot of stories of him running with the best friends and trying to complete a hit on White Boy Rick and the security guard for Maserati Rick. What's your take on Nate Boone Craft?
Well, Nate, I met him the first time when we were trying the best friends guys. There was 8 defendants in front of Judge Cohn federal court. And Nate was a witness for the government. So what you were talking about before, does it mean he's a snitch? I don't know. He was a witness for the government. He pointed at some of the defendants and said they participated in homicides, because there was drugs too, but a lot of it was just plain old murder, because they killed a lot of people, okay? As I told you earlier, I knew from the discovery, from one of the interviews with him, that he had claimed he had killed Demetrius Holloway, which I knew was false. And when you do what I do for a living, all you're really looking for when you're cross-examining a witness, particularly what people call a snitch, or what I would say somebody that's inside who has turned, you're just looking for a couple things that are obviously false, because all you're really trying to show, and this is really important, a lot of lawyers think it's okay to show that the snitch is a bad guy. And that's easy to do. He's a killer, he's this, he's that. Charles Wilkes testified in that thing. He admitted he killed 12 people.
Yeah.
But just making him a bad guy doesn't do it for you if you're the defense lawyer. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, yeah, he's a bad guy, but he's friends with your guy, which means your guy is no saint either. But more importantly, what you have to show, he's a lying bad guy. That he's a liar, and therefore you can't trust what he's telling you about anything else. So to get back to Nate, so I know who he is, because I've talked to some people out in the world too to find out who he really was. And I knew he had claimed that one time. I never met him before, never saw him before. I can tell you this, he casts, he's older now. This was 20 years ago probably.
Right.
He casts a very intimidating figure, and the lawyers, and there were good lawyers in the case, but I could tell they were a little bit scared of him. Even though we're in a courtroom, there's all kinds of marshals. And I told him, you guys go, I'm going to go last. And so I got up there and, he knew who I was and I knew who he was. And I just started out with, so Mr. Kraft, you're supposed to be telling the truth to everybody, right? Right. So what's this? You killed Demetrius Holloway? Oh, no, I didn't. Because he knew I knew, because he knew I knew who did it. I mean, what are you talking about, And he backed off of that. And one thing led to the next. And we were fine. Now, they do the White Boy Gets Out, or maybe he was still in. They do the documentary. It was a great documentary by a guy named Sean Red, I think. He gave me some tickets. My wife and I went, my son. and one of my son's buddies. And Johnny Curry was there. He was long since someone, he and I'd see each other, hey. Sitting right in front of me, Nate, and I think his wife, and maybe a couple kids, like his family. And now they put the documentary on, and he's on there, and he's showing he's got 46 bullet holes in him. And, and he and I get along fine. So the thing ends, and my son's friend, who kind of thought maybe he'd be a lawyer and a criminal lawyer, thing ends. I look, I say, oh, there's Boone. So I go over there, yeah, we hug, shake hands, hey, how you doing? He introduces me, blah, 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 blah. I come back, and the kid says, wasn't that Nate Boone Kraft? I said, yeah, what do you mean? You over there hugging with him and talking to him? He said, he's the killer. I said, I think you better go to law school for something different than criminal. Yeah. if you're going to be nervous talking to him. So the long and the short of it is, I don't know how many people he killed. I mean, I know what he says. I don't know any of that kind of stuff. And people really have to understand that even if you're close to the game, if you got a brain as a defense lawyer, you can't get too damn close to the game. You can't be in there when the people are selling dope. You can't be around listening to them talk about murder and stuff. I mean, you just can't do that. There have been some lawyers who've done it, and some of them have paid the price for that too.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the hit game, or I guess hitmen, in your mind, who are like the top three like most notorious Detroit hitmen that you known about?
Well, I mean, it's no secret. Everybody knows about Chester Campbell. Everybody said, now he was older than me. And I, as I told Prophet, I only met him one time. He asked me to come. He had one of his peeps come to the jail to see him with something about in the field. Chester Campbell, from what everybody said, I don't know this. He was the number one guy ever. That's what they say. Very, very smart. He'd been in prison a lot of times, and he wasn't a lawyer, obviously, but he definitely thought he was a lawyer, and he knew. And I could tell when we were talking, we were just sitting in the county jail, closer than you and I are. And he would have been the one wanting to do everything. And I just have never, and I told him, I said, Chester, look, first thing, appeals are really not my thing. I'm really a trial guy. And number two, I said, you just need somebody to write this stuff down and sign their name. You're going to do it. And I just don't want to do that. And we shook hands, and that's the last time I ever saw him. And so after that, I don't know. I hesitate to, I don't like to point fingers at people.
Gotcha.
I really don't. There's a couple other guys that they know who they are, and people on the east side know who they are too. But but I'm not pointing the finger at them. There's a lot of guys. There were in those days a lot of really tough guys.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think people really don't understand, a lot of those guys had leadership qualities. I've always said that about Demetrius. If he'd have gone in a business, he'd have rose to the top. He'd have had a better idea. It's just it's sad that circumstances drive a lot of these kind of guys into the streets. And then once you get in the streets and you get a conviction, and everybody that's been you're trying to get a job, well, you were convicted 14 years ago, blah blah blah. It's a really, really sad dynamic, because there's a lot of those guys that really they could have done a lot of good if they'd have been in the right situation. But if I tell the youth anything, when I go speak at the schools, I don't talk specifically about anybody, obviously, but I tell them, you all really need to pay attention to what you're doing now, especially once you become 17, because that's an adult in Michigan. Yeah. Because that stuff will haunt you. You could be the greatest draftsman in the world, but there's a job opening and 4 people apply. You and 3 guys with no convictions. They probably won't even interview you. They'll just, It's easy to put that application aside. And I think a lot of youth, going back to your original question about how we were raised, where we had the dads that had been in the military and the Depression mentality, it was impressed on us that any little thing can screw you up. Yeah. And it's easy to do. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or you say, maybe I'll make $500. $500? $5,000. You're going to blow it on a limo to the All-Star game anyway. A lot of the kids in the streets. It's not like you're going to take the $5,000 and invest it in GM stock. You're going to blow it anyway. It's just, it's sad. It really is.
Now, when it comes to drug kingpins, you represented Maserati Rick. You represented Demetrius Holloway. What about like Fat Man Eddie Jackson? Did you ever?
Eddie Fat Man. See, you got to understand. You got to understand because you're young. When you grow up in Detroit, there were names that you heard, right?
Right.
They weren't in our neighborhood, but that's the names. Eddie Jackson was one that you heard, and I do remember him calling Fat Man. I think and he was a fat man. There was no doubt about that. But that was before my time. Even Frank Usher, Frank Nitti, who I wound up representing, he was older. You know, Frank he passed in the last year or two. He was probably 10 years older than me.
Okay.
And a lot of those guys, people ask me about Henry Marzette. We heard about him, but I think he was dead by the time I became a lawyer or something like that.
So in your heyday, you're catching the YBIs.
Otis Culpepper and I are the same age, okay? And O knew the YBI guys, Butch and Seal. And then I represented the Pony Down guys. It was the Buttram brothers, and then all these guys that worked with them. That's what really started the whole thing for both of us. I mean, we had drug cases before, but and then those guys both, because they were making so much dough and nothing was ever happening because we were beating the cases, the feds got them both, and that's what really kind of started everything. And then after they got them, then the Currys, that was a few years after that, and then Q, you know, that's how it worked.
Okay, so it's kind of with the Kingpin. I mean, like we did with the Hitmen, Kingpins. Who like you think were like the top of the top of Kingpin? I guess crews or people out of Detroit.
Again, it's hard for me to say that for sure because I'm not counting the drugs or counting the money. I mean, I think that
I guess notoriety-wise,
notoriety-wise, YBI was the first, and it was they used young kids.
Yeah,
and it was a unique way to do it, and they took over neighborhoods, and they were the most notorious, and the Pony Boys were pretty notorious too.
Now, did Pony come out of young YBI?
No. They quarreled. I don't know if they ever shot each other, but they probably shot at each other every now and then. But no, they were different. There was Leroy Buttram, who just passed away. We're almost the exact same age. I think he died 2 years ago.
Okay.
And his brothers. And then they had a lot of other guys, some guys from Chicago.
Okay.
So they were pretty notorious. And then the Currys were pretty notorious, you know. And see, Frank, by the time I was a lawyer, Frank Usher, there wasn't any drug talk. He had a drug case. He went to the feds. But it was that murder, you know, where they cut the people's heads off. That's what became the big deal.
Yeah. Which,
if they'd have just killed them, I don't think it would have been a big deal, quite frankly. There'd just been 3 dead people on St. Antoine or wherever it was. And then Quasan Lewis, you know, his was a weed thing, and he did pretty good.
Well, did you ever have to represent the Chambers brothers?
I did. The Chambers brothers, you know, the Chambers brothers. I represented Willie. They were from Marianna, Arkansas. Yeah. They'd come in, 3 or 4 of them together. The receptionist would call back. She'd say, real quiet, the Smurfs are here. I tell you, these guys were 5'4" or 5'5" each. The tallest one was maybe 5'7". Honest to God. They were the littlest guys. They were easy guys to deal with, though. Yeah. I represented Willie. Then, of course, the feds got them, too. Same thing.
Yeah.
And everybody took a plea, and nobody got drilled too horrible. I'd forgotten about them. Yeah, I had those guys.
Because a lot of people look at the Chambers brothers as like the ones that kind of became the crack kingpins that really got crack going in Detroit.
That was a little before them, too. They were, I think Meech, it was starting up. Meech was killed in 90, I think, 89 or 90.
Okay.
Late 80s, it was already starting.
Already rolling. Do you remember when crack hit the streets?
Right, I would say right around in that area. I remember being told about it. And I didn't even know how they said it would be like a softball. And then you would cut the thing up and then I guess cook it. I don't know however way they did it. But I can tell you this, the effect on people, oh my God. Man. I started out as a lawyer when there was a lot of heroin junkies, right? And they'd come to court, because they'd be asleep. You'd wake them up. The cops would wake them up, Then the regular cocaine, they'd be a little more jittery. But the crack, I knew 3 or 4 lawyers, good lawyers, that destroyed their lives. They started using cocaine, then somebody talked them into that. I mean, guy would go from 175 to 130.
Jeez.
I mean, literally. And you'd see it you could tell their eyes were funny. for the life of me, the only thing I ever was told by people who did it was that the high was so unbelievable. Kind of like what these idiots do now with the fentanyl.
Yeah.
It's going to kill them, but they do it because the high is, really? The high is great and you drop dead? I mean, that's beyond my comprehension,
Yeah.
you know. But I think that's what, there was something about that crack high. I mean, David, we talked about David Ruffin. He weighed, 115 when he died?
Yep.
He was a crackhead.
Seeing, like, did you ever represent anybody from Motown that came through here at that time? They was pretty much gone by the time you...
No, by the time I was a lawyer, Motown was still a bit... They had left when did they leave for California? The short answer is no, I never represented... I don't think any of those guys ever got in that kind of trouble.
Gotcha.
I don't remember. Those guys were entertainers. They weren't getting involved in that kind of stuff.
Now, there was a lot of, like, rumors behind, like, corruption as far as Detroit politics. Gil Hill comes up. Mayor Kwami Young comes up. And, of course, followed down to my generation, Kwami Kilpatrick. When you think of Mayor Kwami Young and Gil Hill, what is your perception of them?
The only thing, I know Gil really, really well because he was a homicide sergeant and I had a lot of cases, and we got along great. I thought he was a really good guy. I don't know anything about him doing anything specifically that I ever heard back then. I just know from the White Boy documentaries and from what Rick has said, and that's all I know. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, it's hearsay. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't know anything about it, and I never heard anything about it while it was going on. While Gil was still there before he went on, became with the Mumford T-shirt.
Gotcha.
Yeah. With respect to Coleman, I never heard, nobody was ever charged that I can remember with any kind of corruption thing with him. I think they all thought he was corrupt. They thought he was getting money. They thought he was doing this and that. But I think that it's easy to say that. Is there any politician that one way or another doesn't benefit? Look at the guy from New Jersey, the senator that's been indicted. I mean, selling secrets to the Egyptians. And it's all because of his wife, his new wife. She's... I mean, there's always going to be that kind of a feeling that somebody's benefiting. The only time I never heard that was when Dennis Archer was mayor. Well, no, or Bing either. Dennis Archer, Dave Bing, and nobody ever said anything like that.
So when they look at the corruption with, like, mayors, was it just taking money? Like, because, like, when they was talking about Kwami.
Well, that one was easy. I mean, it was easy, basically selling contracts. I had nothing to do with that case. I didn't represent anybody in the case.
Gotcha.
I didn't represent any witnesses in the case. But I just read the indictment and read the newspaper and listened to what was. I mean, it seemed to me it was just pay to play, which is common in a lot of cities, unfortunately. So Kwami Kilpatrick had a future. It's to me, it's really, really sad.
Yeah. So why did you think he was able to be taken down? Like, I mean, because if contracts pay to play is kind of common amongst politicians, what took him?
Here's what my guess is. Okay, I think it's the same thing that caused, for instance, the BMF. When Demetrius Flannery decided to start having billboards down there in Atlanta, BMF rules the world. You think the cops aren't even going to pay attention? You think the feds? BMF, who the fuck are they?
Yeah.
They're not a rock group. They're not a ball club. They're dope dealers, okay? I think what happens in corruption cases, if the corruption is everywhere, it's all over the place, people get in trouble. It wouldn't have to be necessarily for that. Somebody gets in trouble for who knows what and says, hey, let me tell you about what went on with me and the mayor and boo, 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 boo. That's what I think happened there. I just think there was so much going on, it sounds like, from reading about the case and hearing about the case, that there just were too many people telling. You know, and then of course they were able to find he was living high on the hog. You're making a salary as a mayor, and he was always a politician. It wasn't like Dennis Archer, who was a great lawyer, or Dave Bing was a top 50 NBA basketball player. He made money in his life. Had a big business. I just think that's what happens sometimes. Guys get cocky.
Yeah.
Menendez, again, the thought that he would do this after being tried on it in 2015. Yeah. The thought he would do this, it's beyond my comprehension. I just can't imagine it.
Did you ever hear about the stripper party at the mayor mansion?
Everybody heard about it. And, but again, I had guys sit in my office and claim they were there. You got to remember, talk is cheap.
Yeah.
And people love to gossip. And so people hear something from some jackass, and then they go tell their friends as if they heard it from from God. It's like it's the truth. How many different stories have we heard about not just the stripper party? Remember how she was in the car and then the guy got killed?
Yeah.
She got killed and didn't hit the guy. I had a guy in my office that claimed he was the other person in the car. That's what he said. Now I'm looking at him. I thought he was completely full of shit. But he's telling me, and it was because it was in my old neighborhood. It was on like Outer Drive and Cherry Lawn or something like that. And they had to be going for her and blah, blah, blah. And it must have been Kwami. I mean, really? They investigated it 25 different ways, right?
Yeah.
And if anybody thinks that the feds or the state even wouldn't have wanted to nail him for a murder, if there was really evidence to support it, of course they would have tried to.
Absolutely.
I just think it's a lot of talk,
Now, we get ready to end with this. For somebody, hopefully this never happens, but it happens all the time. Somebody get caught up in a murder. What should they do?
If someone committed one?
Yeah.
I would say the same thing that anybody should do when they're caught up in anything serious, and particularly with the feds. The first thing they should do is contact a lawyer. The first thing. I mean, a murder's a little bit different because they're not going to let you walk in. Well, they will let you walk in, turn yourself in, but then you're going to be held without bond. But you need to have a lawyer. Anybody that's listening to this, I don't care what it's for. I don't care if a police officer approaches you for jaywalking. You should never talk to the police without having talked to a lawyer first and hopefully having that lawyer with you when you're talking. Because what people don't realize, and white-collar people are the worst at it. A street guy, oh, no, fuck you, I ain't talking to you, call FISHMAN.
Yeah.
White-collar people, they try to answer the feds' questions, and they think that they're doing okay, but they're not doing okay because the feds know the answers to the questions when they're asking them.
Yeah.
It's a crime to lie to an FBI officer.
Gotcha.
5-year felony. So anyway, that's what they should do. Anybody that's been involved in anything, it certainly doesn't have to be me at age 74. I got plenty to do. Talk to a lawyer right away. Get the lawyer involved right away.
Now, I got to touch on this because we really didn't get into Maserati Rick and Demetrius Holloway real quick. Were they as big as people? Because, like when people pass away,
you get bigger.
You get bigger. You
No
become
doubt.
legendized. We knew Maserati Rick was buried in the BMW and, he was known for getting money around the city. First of all, who you felt like was getting more money, Maserati Rick or Demetrius Holloway?
That's the kind of question I was telling you about before. There's no way for me to know that. To me, Meech, if I was going to pick a leader between the two, now this has nothing to do with how much money, I would pick Meech because Demetrius Holloway was really, really a good guy. Forget about what all the stuff that went out there, whether he had people shot or whatever. But he was a good guy. He was smart as hell. He was very respectful of everybody. I won 2 different jury trials, one in federal court and one in state court with him.
Okay.
And he testified in the federal case. And these were 12 white jurors. And he was smart, well-spoken, and he had leadership qualities. I think that if I was going to pick for that thing, I would pick Meech. But I don't know what was going on in the projects or going on in they're all people shooting at each other. I mean, that's why I kind of stay over here. And
Gotcha.
they're going to be shooting at people. I don't want them to be shooting at me.
What was the personality of Maserati Rick?
Rick was he was cheap as hell. I told you the story. That's why you're asking me. He owed me some money. It is a good story. Like $3,000 he owed me, and he wouldn't pay. I'd beaten a pistol case. It was just a little bullshit case. And I got one of the East Side guys. I typed up something that I was withdrawing from a case, and it said on there because he owed me money. And I think I even put $3,000. I think. And I told him go post it up on by the skating rink and anywhere where all the fellas are. And about 2 days later, what the fuck? What'd you do that for? I said, you owe me the money. You wouldn't pay. I figured I'd get your attention. And sure enough, he came in that day. As I said, I think he brought me a leather coat. It was probably a $2,000 or $3,000 leather coat, but I think he brought a coat. He even then didn't want to part with the money. You know? He might have stole the coat. I don't know, but he was all right to deal with. He wasn't like Meech at all to me.
Gotcha.
He wasn't the same kind of guy. Demetrius was always thinking a step ahead. That's why I was surprised when he got killed at the Broadway. When one of the reporters called me, to tell me it had happened. I was surprised. I knew that there was some shit going on because he had been coming into when he'd come in the office, the last 2 or 3 times he'd pull out a gun and put it somewhere. He was carrying a gun around, and he didn't do that for all the other times.
Because at one point faked his death, right?
Oh, that was a classic. Yeah, but that was again I think that was when they were at war. Maybe he and Ed. He faked his death. He threw him in the trunk, and he was gone for months.
Yeah.
One day the phone rings. That was before cell phones, I think. Phone rings. I pick up the phone. He says, "This is the dead talking." I said, "Meech, what the fuck?" But he called me. He said it was the dead talking. Yeah.
Did you really believe he was dead when you heard?
No,
Okay.
I never believed it.
Now, somebody said he was beefing with somebody in prison named World. Maybe I heard Eddie.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. And so
Meech was never in prison. In fact, I don't know that Meech ever went to state prison. He went to the feds for, of all things, stealing from boxcars. That's a federal crime because it's, the trains and blah, blah. I don't think he ever had. He got charged with felon in possession.
Okay.
In state court, and we beat it with the jury. He got charged with felon in possession federal court. And had he not been killed, he was going to be indicted. He was going to go do some time.
Yeah.
Not life, but he would be like the Currys and Buttram, and he was going to get a decent amount of time.
Yeah, because I did see the interview. Well, not interview, but you know how like Eddie Jackson Jr. He got his true crime.
I represented him. He's a character.
Yeah,
but he wasn't his daddy though.
And he said that, and it was him that said that because he was real close with Demetrius Holloway, and that Demetrius, him getting gunned down in the Broadway was by this kind of gay gang leader named World, allegedly. That's what he said on the interview. That's who got down on him. Like the guy knew that he faked his death, and Demetrius was already having beef with the best friends, and this other dude was on his tail, and he was trying to tell him like, "Hey man, just pay the dude off in jail so that part can go away." When Demetrius faked his death, allegedly the dude in jail had one of his gay friends get a job at the Broadway because he believed that one day Demetrius was going to walk in, and one day he walked in and dude supposedly made the call.
Well,
according to Eddie Jackson Jr.
Well, I haven't seen Eddie in a long time. But he was a storyteller, I will tell you that.
Yeah.
He wasn't any big, I represented him on, like an 8 ball or something like that.
Okay.
He was no big drug guy. He was a good guy, but he could tell stories. So. I'm not commenting on what you just said. He said whether it's accurate or not.
Got you.
And a lot of times you got to remember, and your viewers I'm sure know this, there can be some truth, some exaggeration, and some outright lie, all in the same story. And that could be what you were hearing.
Well, I tell you what, Steve, man, I appreciate you sitting down with me. Man, definitely a legend. Hopefully in the future we get another one in.
Well, I don't know how much of the future. Remember, my next birthday, I'm going to be 75. So.
Hey, with technology, people might start living in the next few years to 120 easily.
You never know. My son just got married, so if they decide to have a kid or two, I'd like to have another one, take him out, and teach him how to shoot at age 80.
There you go. Well, until we meet again.
Okay, you got it.